Hello, welcome to the November Recreational Astronomy Night Meeting online edition of the Toronto Centre RESC. Apologies for last night's meeting cancellation. YouTube, which is our platform for the live broadcast, suffered an extensive outage between 7 and 9 p.m. right at the time of our meeting. So thank you for coming back this evening and for joining us again. My name is Paul Markov, and aside from introducing the speakers, I also search for presentations for our upcoming meetings. So if you have a presentation in mind, please get in touch with me. We have openings for the January and later meetings. Before we begin the presentations, I'd like to thank in advance our technical team comprised of Andrew and Betty Reed, Blake Nancaro, Ward Legros, and Anya Chulucci. Thank you for making these online presentations possible for us. We have 3 speakers this evening, and I expect we will be done around 9:30. The speakers are Denis Grey with The Sky This Month. Next is Wayne Parker. He's the owner and designer of SkyShed and
Okay, everyone, welcome back. Sorry about that. We had a little bit of a handoff difficulty there, but we're back and running again. And we'll get started with the Sky This Month. As usual, I like to start with the big picture, and we'll talk about some of the highlights for the next 4 weeks or so. We'll spend a little time on planets and the moon. There's lots to talk about there this month. Talk about comets and then some suggested fall targets, and then we'll have a little time for questions as we want to going forward. Just to kick off, some sort of big news from the world of spaceflight. There is a launch expected for the Dragon X crew capsule on Saturday. So it's targeted for about 10 to 8 on Saturday night to go to the ISS. This is a routine, well, hopefully going to become a routine resupply mission for the SpaceX capsule. And this is the first time that they're going to be sending a full crew up to the ISS. They've done their full tests of the launch escape system. They've done the tests of the overall rocket. So this is the full integrated system that's supposed to supply the ISS on an ongoing basis for the next, foreseeable future. And this will be its first launch. So this is a big deal, and hopefully everything is going to go really well. Of course, that date and time is subject to scrubs and rescheduling and so on. But keep an eye on that. So that's going to be quite nice, I think, hopefully. Looking at the planets this month, we've got pretty well all of the classical planets are available at some point during the month. Mercury is visible in the morning sky for the next 2 weeks. It's a bit tricky, low in the horizon. It's not a particularly great apparition, but it is there if you can get a good clear horizon and know where to look. Venus is obvious in the morning sky. Starting to fade a little bit, but it's still very, very bright, magnitude minus 3.1 or so. And it's heading towards conjunction in March of 2021. So we still have a couple, 3 months to enjoy Venus in the morning sky. And it'll be starting to make its change and diving down towards the sun later in the season. Mars is still very prominent, still very obvious. I've been enjoying it. It's one of the most brightest, punchy things that you can see in the sky. It's coming through very nice. It's fading towards magnitude minus 1.1 and about 15 degrees in width by the end of the month. So every day now, as it goes by, it's going to get a little smaller. And so your best chance to view Mars is if it wasn't a month and a half ago when it was at its maximum and its brightest, well, it's tonight because it's going worse as time goes on. Jupiter and Saturn are quite close together. Hovering near Sagittarius, so they're getting closer and closer to the western horizon near sunset. But what I've been noticing lately is the gap between Jupiter and Saturn is notably getting smaller and smaller. Over this next month or so, it's going to close from 5 degrees to 2 degrees, which is really close together. And so you will, if you keep an eye on Jupiter and Saturn, you'll see Jupiter appearing to overtake Saturn. Part of that is our angle changing as we go in our orbit, but part of it is actually Jupiter lapping Saturn in its orbit is there. And at this time of year, both Neptune and Uranus are both well placed for observation in the evening sky. So what does that look like in terms of the overall pattern of the sky. So we see that, here's the sun. Whoops, wrong screen. Here's the sun. You can see Jupiter and Saturn quite close together, just past Sagittarius now. Neptune and Uranus are, as I mentioned, well placed for evening observation, and Mars is right between them roughly during the month. And then we have Mercury and Venus in the morning sky, and this is basically placed in there. Mars, just comparing it again with the last time I spoke about this was actually in May. So you can see Mars in December is going to be roughly where it was in July. So in terms of the size difference, it starts to fade. And generally speaking, when it gets down to 10 degrees and in width, that's about the mark where visible features start to become hard to perceive and hard to see. So again, the next 6 weeks or so is probably the best time we'll have to see Mars. And one of the things about the way that Mars approaches Earth, because Mars has a much more elliptical orbit than us, when it comes close to Earth during the months of sort of August, September, October, that's when it gets as maximum closeness. Other oppositions, when it comes close to us, it's much further away. So it'll be another 10, 15 years or so before it comes back as close and as good as it has been this past viewing period. And I hope everybody's had a chance to get out there with your telescopes and enjoy a bit of Mars time. In terms of where we are with light and darkness, I think everybody's noticed the time change, the discontinuity that comes with that. It's interesting from an astronomer's perspective that there's some people are rising up against the time change, and I think that would be all. I think most people who are into astronomy would appreciate that. It would make life a little bit easier for us. But as you can see right now, we're heading. Things are starting to slow down. Our total night is up to 10 hours, almost 11 hours, and we're only going to gain between now and the winter solstice. We're only going to gain another half an hour or so of night, astronomical twilight, and so on. So we're really, we're into the dark period of the year now, but it's still warm enough compared to, say, February, which is on the other side of the solstice, to get out there and do things. And certainly the past week, we've had extraordinarily excellent opportunities, and we've had great weather for observing. So I hope everybody's had a chance to do that. So stepping away a little bit from Earth, where are we in our orbit kind of thing? What are we looking at? So I used this in the past just to sort of indicate where things are. So Sagittarius and the Milky Way, it's heading down towards the horizon, and that's the summer Milky Way is what's leaving us. And now as the Earth goes through its orbit, we're starting to see this area here outside of our galaxy. And so the number of star clusters and the Milky Way itself is you see much less of it when you look out in the night sky. And typically what we see in the autumn sky is relatively less than we see in the summer sky. So you see all the good stuff that's disappearing here with the summer sky, and what we're left with are what are called the water constellations. So if you look at the water constellations here, we have Aquarius, the water bear, we have Cetus, the whale, Pisces, the fish, and of course everyone's favorite, Capricornus, the sea goat. Everyone, of course, the famous sea goat is always there, and also Pisces austrinus, which is the southern fish. So all of these constellations are related to water. And what they have in common, of course, is that they're sparse. There's not that much to see. But there are a lot of good galaxies to be found out there, and there's also other targets that are available. But relatively speaking, there's less in terms of Messier objects and things like that to see here. In fact, this is where the Messier hole is right around here, which is the reason we can have a Messier marathon in March is by the time when the sun moves into this part of the sky, it's not obscuring any Messier objects, which allows us an opportunity in one night during the couple of weeks in March to observe all of the Messier objects because they're not obscured by the sun. And the reason that happens is there's a hole here, the Messier hole, which has no Messier objects in it, and so that allows, so there's nothing being obscured there. But so looking a little bit to the east, the autumn sky as I mentioned, doesn't have that many things to observe, generally speaking. But if you stay up a little late now, even 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, the winter sky starts to make its appearance. And this is also part of the Milky Way. And we see, things like the Pleiades, the Hyades, and Orion, all very visible just a little bit later on in the evening. Talking a little bit about opportunities to see things that come together, appulses. So November 19th is an important date because that's when we're going to have a nice meetup of the moon with Jupiter and Saturn. So as I mentioned, Jupiter and Saturn are getting very close together. They'll be about 2.5, 3 degrees apart. And then it's going to join them in a fairly tight photogenic group. That's three out of the 4 brightest things in the sky all together in one place. And hopefully we'll have some clear skies to enjoy that because that'll be quite nice. November 25th, the moon's going to be rolling below Mars. So again, Mars is still pretty prominent, -1 or so. So it's going to be a nice conjunction as well. And then on December 12th in the morning sky, we're going to have the moon passing very near Venus. And in fact, in some parts of North America, it will be actually occulted by the moon. That's not going to be happening down here in southern Ontario, but it will be very close. So you can keep that in mind. And then on December 21st, and this is kind of for the next sky this month, but this is important. This is really interesting to me. So Jupiter and Saturn, as they continue to get closer and closer together, from Earth's perspective, they're going to be the closest they've been since 1623, which is really close and probably within the same field of view of a single eyepiece. So that's something to keep in mind. And again, those are 2 very bright planets. So this is it's not something like when Venus and Uranus get together where you can barely see Uranus and Venus is, in the whole show. Here are 2 of the very bright photogenic planets kind of slugging it out. So that's a bit of a Christmas special, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that next month. Looking at our new neighbor, the moon. So we've got new moon is coming up this weekend. So that's very close to that. So we're basically in prime time deep sky object season right now. First quarter, November 21st. November 23rd is straight wall night. So if anybody wants to catch the straight wall on the moon, that's the night when it should be best illuminated. And then November 30th, we have the full moon, which is the Stellektazen moon, which is apparently the moon where you put your canoes in the woods for the winter. So there you go, everyone. I didn't know that before I prepared for this, and now everyone else does too. One of the things that you can see, though, is a penumbral lunar eclipse, which is the 4th lunar eclipse of 2020, which is something pretty special. And I'll just show that off a little bit here. So this is one of my favorite sites, timeanddate.com. And so this penumbral eclipse, normally a penumbral lunar eclipse isn't that exciting because it's not total. So you don't get the whole changing color of the moon and all of that stuff going on. But this is going to be pretty deep. So this animation here shows that penumbra eclipse. And you see here it's hitting the Earth's penumbra. There's the umbra coming in. But you see how close it's getting to the umbra. So this stage right about here near mid-eclipse, that's obvious and really easy to notice that one half of the moon will be duskier. It will be dimmer than the front half of the moon, than the moon normally is. And then it's going to leave it. And roughly when it gets about this far away from the umbra, then it's hard to tell whether it's in eclipse or not. But there's definitely going to be a lunar eclipse. It will be visible. Not super impressive, but if you're out that morning and you're able to take a look at it, then that is certainly a good opportunity. The timing for that, the maximum is around 4:42 a.m., which isn't too bad. And the best visibility for a penumbral eclipse like this is roughly a half an hour on either side of that midpoint or that maximum point for that penumbral eclipse. And then we've got our last quarter coming up on December 7th. Comets. Let's talk about comets. So as usual, I've checked out the really good website, cobs.si, which allows you to do observing planning for comets. It allows you to search for visible comets from your neighborhood, finder charts, magnitudes, and everything else like that. This month, there's one. So that's really good and observable, which is 2020 M3 Atlas. And this is a recent light curve of the comet. So you can see these are observations that are reported by astronomers all over the world. And they're telling us roughly where this comet fits in here. So you can see it's hovering just between 7 and 8th magnitude, which is reasonably bright for a comet, and that's pretty current as of Tuesday. Now, the great thing about this comet is just how easy it is to find. So for those of you who remember last summer when we were looking for Neowise, it was kind of in the north and it was kind of near the sun and all that other stuff. This comet is basically hiding out right near Orion's belt. And some of our crack team of observers that go to Longsu reported seeing this over the weekend. And if anybody wanted to chat it up in the comments and just note how well it showed up, that would be very interesting. But certainly it should be just right off Orion's belt. It should be visible in binoculars in a good dark sky, or maybe you need a telescope from Toronto. But certainly from a find the comet perspective, it doesn't get much easier than that. One of the most notable and visible asterisms in the sky, and it's hanging out right beside it. Looking beyond the comets to meteors. So meteors are related to comets. Often meteors used to be comets, and so forth. We have a big meteor shower coming up, which is the Geminids. It's peaking on Sunday, December 13th. And the maximum forecast, so this is a shower that has a long lead up, and then it has a very sharp peak, and then it quits really quickly. So the good news is the peak this year is happening right over North America. And the better news is that it's the lunar aspect is really good, because the new moon was on December 7th, so the moon will not interfere with this at all. So there's up to 150 meters per minute, or per hour, I should say, possible. It's roughly 2 per minute, although they can be bursty, so you might have 3 or 4 1 minute, and then you might have 5 minutes without any. And the thing that's interesting about the Geminids, they're about 40% slower than the Perseids. So if you're comparing them with the Perseids experience in the summer, you should see them take a little bit more time to come across the sky. Of course, it will still be, oh, look at that. It'll still be too late for the person who's standing beside you to see what you just saw. That doesn't change. But what it should mean is they should be a little bit more majestic, a little bit perhaps easier for you to observe where they're coming from, and their radiant, and some of the other things. There's also a number of other minor showers that are active this month, and you can look over on the International Meteor Organization website. All right, targets recommended. Well, certainly Mars, it's a high recommendation. It almost feels like it's a last chance, because it won't be this good again for quite a while. So get out there and get another look at Mars if you can. This is a great time of year to have a look at Uranus and Neptune, and I usually like to do both of them in the same night, because there's a compare and contrast thing that you can do where you can see Uranus is a little bit more obviously a disk. It's got that light blue color, and then you go to Neptune, it's a bit smaller, but the blue is a lot more prominent, and it shines through a little bit better. So it's kind of cool to compare those two planets together, and I would certainly recommend it. There are a number of globular clusters in the watery part of the sky. So M30, M2, and M72, they're all down there in Capricornus and Aquarius. That's a good chance to see those messy objects as right now. And if you're looking for targets in the southern sky, that's some of the better ones. Of course, M31 and M33, the Andromeda and Triangulum galaxies, although they've kind of we've been observed for a while, they're actually, when the sun sets now, they're pretty well straight up, so they're a really good opportunity now to take pictures of them, and of course to observe them the best you can. My favorites, the Pleiades and Hyades, are also very prominent, and there's some good galaxies available. And we also have the double stars that are available for us right now. So taking a look at the double star catalog here that has been prepared by none other than our own Blake Nancarroll, there are a lot of good double stars available in the fall-autumn season here. The different parts of the sky, a few in Andromeda, Pisces, Cetus, and also Polaris is one of those as well. Of course, you can see that pretty well any time of the year. Lots of variety here in terms of magnitude, and opportunities for you to award your double star certificate. Now, as a lot of people know here, I'm a fan of occultations, and I wanted to share with you an excellent occultation opportunity that we have coming up. So when we're looking for an occultation opportunity, we're looking for a number of different things. So we're looking for, is it a reasonable magnitude that you can pull in with your telescope? This one for Monday is magnitude 9.6, which is really good. Is it reasonably high so that it won't be suffering from extinction and will be fairly clear? 63 degrees up, that's really good. Is it easy to find? It's in Taurus, and the location here is pretty straightforward because the, if I look at the finder chart here, this is Taurus here, and you can see that's Aldebaran there, and it's right off of the lower horn of the bull here is where the occultation is going to occur. So that's also excellent. So the location is great. The timing is good too, because it's a little bit after midnight, but it's not so late in the day that it's going to cause problems. So that's excellent as well. And the duration is very long. It's a large asteroid. It's up to 12 seconds. So even if you're isn't able to take pictures at a very fast rate, you'll still have lots of time to record the occultation. There's only one missing ingredient in all of this other than this. This is a perfect, just about a perfect occultation opportunity. The only missing ingredient really is just the question of weather. And yeah, we kind of knew that, didn't we? We really did, didn't we? So we will and continue to hope for what may be better. Anyway, ISS predictions for this month. I always rely on heavensabove.com for this. So we have an excellent evening series that's beginning on November 17th. We've got events over 40 degrees height with convenient times all happening between 5 and 7 p.m. So this is a really good ISS season. So you can see here from the table, we're switching from the morning basically tonight or this morning. We've had our last pass in the morning series, and now all of these remaining passes right through to December 11th are all evening passes, and they're all between roughly 5 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night. It's such a nice list here. We basically have a good ISS pass pretty well every night through to December 9th, and some of the are best. So what I look for when I'm looking at an ISS pass, again, I'm looking for a nice bright magnitude like minus 3.8 here, minus 3.6. And then I'm also looking for a highest point so that the altitude is high enough that it's going to get over Toronto. Basically, the trees and the buildings and the houses and whatever get in the way. So if the pass is, starts at 10 degrees and goes to 15 degrees and it's 10 degrees, it's harder to spot that and less satisfying to be able to go out and quickly spot it and go, hey, I got that one, and be able to see it. So lots to choose from this month. I've highlighted here some of the good ones that are coming up. And, basically, like I say, it's a salad season for ISS passes. Here's a good example of one of the best ones, November 22nd in the evening, coming up to 83 degrees altitude at the meridian. It's going to go through Cygnus as it's setting and run right through Cassiopeia on its way to the Earth's shadow, where it's going to disappear here right around Perseus. So, like I say, that's a great opportunity and a nice series of ISS passes. Some months we don't have any at all. This month we have a surplus. So there you go. And that is all I've got for tonight. I hope this presentation was enjoyable. I hope you learned a few things, and I hope it encourages you to get out there and do some observing this month. So back to you, Paul.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Fantastic presentation. You covered a lot of material. Thanks again. I know it takes a lot of time to prepare.
Sure.
All right, so let's go to questions. Blake, do we have any for Dennis?
I've been monitoring the YouTube chat. There's been a couple of comments, but I have a question for you, Dennis. Do you celebrate the anniversary on December 1st? That's a maybe.
Was that the first time I got an occultation?
No, I just wanted to remind everybody that that's the birthday of Rask of the Royal Astronomical Society, December 1st, 1868.
Yeah. The first meeting. They probably had Zoom problems then too.
So a question that I have for you is regarding the Ophelia occultation. Did you did you note the rank? Do you recall what the ranking is for that? Is it high?
It's high. It's like it's 100%. It's like massive, massive footprint, and it's going straight over Toronto. Like basically, the path, the predicted path, is going basically from Barrie down to Lake Ontario, and we're pretty well right in the middle of it. So it's a very high probability event. So that plus all of the other good things about it, yeah, and it's going to rain.
Yeah. And can you clarify the date? You showed it on Monday, I think around 1 a.m. So if I have that
so
right.
So it's Sunday night to Monday morning.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if we'd had an extra day, we might have cleared the rain.
Okay. I've been corrected that it technically is not RASC's anniversary on December 1st, but that's when the Toronto Astronomical Club formed December 1st, 1868. That club, the TAC, turned into RASC in 1903. So thanks for the clarifications there. I think I'm just checking for any other questions. I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye now.
All right, so let's move on to our next speaker, and that's Wayne Parker, SkyShed and Beyond. Over to you, Wayne.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much for having me. Happy birthday to you guys, I guess, in a couple of weeks then. Club or society, whichever it is. Yeah, so thanks very much for having me. It's always a pleasure. And the RASC, especially the Toronto Centre, is very near and dear to our hearts. I, as they used to say, courted my wife by going to the planetarium and seeing the guest speakers on a monthly basis. In fact, until we moved away to darker skies. We moved to southwestern Ontario in the early 90s, and we missed it. We still do. And we missed the planetarium too, but that's another story. So it's always a pleasure to have any dealings with the RASC, and of course we deal with members of the Toronto Centre and members of the RASC right across Canada, almost on a daily basis, because of the fact that we've been very fortunate that astronomers and Canadian astronomers have adopted our solutions over the last 20 years, and I'm very, I guess, proud and happy to say that it's hard to figure numbers exactly, but we got to be over 10,000 of our designs, our observatory designs around the world now in almost 20 years. And it has to be just based on sales of plans, the sales of our pods and our pod maxes, and not nearly that number of our telescope peers. We sell an awful lot of peers, and it's a really enjoyable part of what we do. Of course, for those of you who may not be familiar, when I say pier, in different parts of the world, they're known as pedestals. In our case, it's a steel pole that supports the telescope and or mount, and it lets you get a tripod out of the way. So it's for a permanent installation, or certainly semi-permanent at least. And it all this started really in the by the mid 90s. I was really tired after 25 years. And a lot of you will really understand this. Tearing my stuff down, setting my stuff up, hoping that Friday night would be clear, and then spending 3 hours setting up. And as more gear came along, and this was, by the 80s, in the mid 80s and stuff, and inevitably, of course, the clouds would roll in. I'd be running the weather radio the whole time, outside listening for, I'd hear encroaching, the clouds were coming, and that's about the best we had in those days. I got really tired of doing that, like most astronomers do. Maybe some enjoy it, seen as a form of exercise or something, but for me, I knew that if I was going to really be able to pursue the real passion I had for astronomy and getting deeper into it, I I'd need a more permanent structure, something to put my my telescope in and leave it in and have instant access, you might say. And at the time on the internet, now, by the time I started really considering this, it was now, let's say, the early 90s, mid 90s, the internet was fledgling, and I would search and search, and there was really nothing. There was 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6 websites you could see that people had built their own geodesic dome or a roll-off to some degree or something, or fabricated a classic style dome out of, I don't know, materials, masonite. That was a good one. So anyway, sorry, it just sounds funny. I'm going to make a dome out of masonite and put all my expensive equipment inside. We'll see what happens when it rains. So, I was really frustrated that when I looked at commercial solutions, there was none Canadian at the time that I found that was anywhere near in the consumer realm, you might say. They were mostly American, and then if you went offshore to Europe or Australia, where there were existing observatory makers, they were all fiberglass. They were very expensive. And when I looked around and talked to fellow club members, and because I've gone to Starfest for decades, since the beginning, basically, in the time, there used to be one called Germania at the same time, which was another great one. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to Terry Dickinson. He would be the guest speaker. He'd be speaking about Mars, and I'd say, observatories, what do you do? And he invited me to visit his, and I did one dark, stormy or sort of fall night. And the first thing I noticed is it only opened about 3 feet. It was a roll-off. It was stuck. It was old, and it used a classic design, which is a caster and rollers, angle iron, I should say, and casters, which is very unforgiving as far as tolerance, because your 2 V's are meshing. And I noticed that people would concrete their support roll-offs into the ground, and which gave you no adjustability if you're in any kind of moving soil, frost, etc. So I considered these things, and I thought, if I'm going to build one for myself, maybe I could do it in such a way that others could replicate what I've done and do it all over the world. Try and standardize the parts. Speak to every professional, carpenters, concrete makers, steel makers, anything I could think of. If someone ever offers me a tour of their factory, certainly not these days, I take it. To me, that's like going to the zoo. Wow, all these machines that make things and do things, and what could I do with that? So I got that idea, and the funny thing is, we moved away from the city to southwestern Ontario for dark skies, and I started seeing these. I saw 2 things. I saw these sheds that a family regionally was known, like a family business, where they had made these for years. And I thought, I remembered back to when I was a kid in the 60s, and this article stuck in my head about a UCLA, I believe it was UCLA, a professor who was allowed to build a roll-off in Joshua Tree. And all I remember is it looked like a log cabin. It wasn't much to it. And I kept seeing these picturesque little cabin, like gingerbread house sheds around the area I moved to out in the country. And I tracked down the people who made them. I said, if you took that, I actually made them a graphic and animation, took a picture of one, said, if you took this and moved this roof and we made outrigger supports, this would be what's called a roll-off observatory. Well, not to belabor the point, we started making them, and now there's I don't know, thousands. It's wonderful. It's wonderful. And we may get to make a lot of piers, and we get to see all the pictures, and people send us thousands of pictures, and how happy they are. And one of the things that I approach design from, one of the big areas I approach design from is functionality. Well, quality first, but functionality, longevity, and low maintenance. I think if you put those things together, and time has proven the test. I'm sitting next to my SkyShed roll-off. It's almost 20 years old. I can push a button or roll it off with one hand with minimal maintenance each year. I'm speaking to you from, as you see in the larger image now, Pod Max, which is our larger because we went from sheds. The problem with the sheds was we couldn't ship them. We couldn't ship them all over the world. It was very expensive. And I knew that if we were successful with the sheds, we'd want to go to our domes. And that's when we came out with pod. And of course, the CAO has, or CARS, I like to call it, has 6, I believe, there, and a SkyShed. We're very honored by that. It shows you like our stuff. And actually, as I'm speaking, I want to show you a few things. So, you know, I don't want to spend my whole time talking about our history and all that. If you know of us, I say, you know, certainly if you're a Canadian astronomer, you either know of us, either own one of our solutions, or I know somebody does, you know. And we work very hard to support our customers and I hate to think of them as just customers, because they're long-term relationships. Some of our customers we've known for 20 years now and seen the incredible things they've done. And others, we've seen the move from setting up to a more permanent solution so that you get serious. And now, I mean, I'm going to use Ron Breacher as an example. Ron Breacher out of Guelph has become quite well known. He needed a place to be able to set up and do his thing, and he made the most of it, and he's done fantastically. And there's dozens of sort of Rons around the world that we know of that have just gone on to do sort of amazing things. And that really, then I look back and say, well, that's what we were trying to achieve. We're trying to, by making low cost observatories instead of those expensive fiberglass ones that I looked up in the 90s, by making them affordable and making them quality and that they last. And some of our pods, for instance, are on their even 6th owners, which is pretty crazy. It's not good for business. Come on, folks, buy a new one. I mean, I'm kidding. And we support them. Like just today, we work 7 days a week, sometimes 12 hours a day, supporting the thousands of astronomers. And I personally speak to everybody all the time because I love it. It's fellow astronomers. Say, send me your shots from last night. And they say, well, send me yours. And here's a few, by the way. That's Pod Max I'm sitting in now, out in the country here. It's not open like that right now. It's a little chilly. You can probably see my breath. It's about 1 degree in here. But these are just a few. And I just want to touch on before, because I know I don't want to go way over time here. But we're very thankful. We're very busy. I don't want to say I feel guilty in these terrible times, but people are taken to the sanctuary of, let's say, their backyard. Or we've always liked that we want to be all inclusive. We've always tried to support and attract women and girls to astronomy and to our products, because we hope it'll encourage them to do that, and all ages as well. And we're seeing that. And in fact, if you go to Facebook, if you're on Facebook, we have SkyShed Observatories. Just search that, or me, Wayne Parker, and we daily share pod and shed and Pod Max owner images, and some of them are they're getting more incredible all the time. And the next thing I want to touch on is the fact that it's finally coming to fruition. I'm just going to flip through a few of these. What I hoped would happen 15 years ago is sort of coming to fruition, and that is film went the way of the dodo. Cameras got better, scopes got smaller, and there's nothing wrong with a big scope. I'm sitting with a 14-inch scope behind me, which is sort of the beginning of the big scopes, you might say, and I love it. By the way, thank you, Skywatcher. Thank you, Celestron. Thank you, Starizona, because I'm about to put a Hyperstar on, and all my friends with Hyperstars who are doing amazing things keep telling me it's going to blow your mind. But blizzards could start at any time, so I'm putting everything together, and over the winter I'll watch YouTube videos and read books and do things, and then come out here hopefully mid-March when it's above freezing again and a little easier to work. And that's the thing. We build our products to work, year-round. There are pods in Siberia. There are pods, and in fact, let me just open up here. I'm going to show you, and I'm just going to put a slideshow on. But why don't I do that while I'm speaking, so you can see a few. These are, if this will work. Sorry, I just want to use a different program. Sorry about that. And I want to make sure I haven't already got a a slideshow running so I don't screw it up on you guys here. Let me see. Here we go. Open with. I'll do it with. There we go. And then I'll open that. And now I just need to hold tab to see my Zoom. There we go. Whoops. Well, I was almost there. I can't do that. Let me try that again. Sorry about that. There we go. It's running. It was just me. There. I should be good. I can close that. I should be able to. I don't know why this worked earlier and it's not working now, so I'm sorry about that. Let's see. There we go. I think I got it. So just as I'm speaking, these are pods around the world. That's Australia. That's a 20-inch plane wave. That is madness. I forget who sent us this, a drone shot of his XL5. So they're all over. I believe that is in Finland or somewhere. It could be Alaska. I don't know. We ship them everywhere. There's thousands of these things. They're coming out of the woodwork. No, I'm kidding. But it's really a lot of fun. Can you imagine? I spend my day each day helping push the ball up the hill, as I say, to build these things and ship them all over the world. But I spend most of my day speaking with and emailing with and chatting with the fellow astronomers. And we're very active astronomers ourselves. And again, I want to touch on the fact that how happy I am with the smaller cameras and CMOS. Loving the CMOS, loving the live stacking, because we spend so much time helping our fellow astronomers. We have to sort of sneak out to the observatory. So when I see it's clear, I work overtime to get out that night or those nights and push the ball forward with learning, and this year was a big switchover. I wanted to really get into live stacking with CMOS and getting a faster F ratio so I could get so I could do things faster. And I'm so happy. I'm so blown away. Same as I said, I'm using an Altair 294 color TC with the 14-inch edge. With their 0.7 times reducer and the new, very happy with the Skywatcher EQ8 RH. That's $2,000 extra for the RH. So you say it every time you tell a friend that you own that mount. Oh, that's an RH. That's not an R. That's $2,000 more. What it does, I have no idea. But it's $2,000 more, so it's got to be better. So as I said, we always have more we're working on. There's always things up our sleeve for the future, things that we might not be able to discuss at this time. But we're always aware of and getting feedback from our owners, and so we like to react to that. And we're looking forward to really, really exciting things. And oh, that's a strange one you're seeing there now. The gentleman built a platform, and now it's too bad I can't go back to that because it's a slideshow. Built a platform and did that, and I said, would you please put some supports under the base? Because we did build them so that you could put hundreds of pounds in them, but they'd have to be supported on the edges, So our websites, our Facebook websites are skyshed.com, skyshedpod.com, skyshedpodmax.com. Oh my God, it goes on forever. We are amalgamating them into the new year. We're working on that now. And again, Facebook, we Instagram and Twitter on that, not as much. Our demographic seems to skew to Facebooking, which is just fine with us because it's a lot of fun. And it's a great place to, comment and be part of a community. So thank you very much for your support. Don't forget, one of the best things for those of you who are in the Toronto Centre who live in Southern Ontario, you've got an observatory factory up in Owen Sound that you can actually hook the trailer on your car or your SUV and drive up there and pick one up and put in your backyard, like this guy here in the picture's doing, building a deck. Oh, what a nice job he did, and probably did it in 3 hours. Look at that. A riser, as I like to call him. I think of his deck as a thing in the background there with railings and stairs and stuff. So, and by the way, pods do go on the grass, gravel, decks, concrete pads, of course. So we design them to they go on, people have them on roofs, I don't know, all over the place. It's great. And so I just want to say, oh, and one last thing I'd like to say too, another exciting thing about this is, can you imagine as a boyhood astronomer growing up, and one of the nice parts about this is is not only with the great people and the fascinating people. I swear every single person I deal with every day should write a book, because they're amazing, incredible people with incredible backgrounds. There's something about astronomers and people who are drawn to it. Many are musicians, and many are ham radio operators. Some have the triumvirate, and not a small percentage. It's a type of brain, I guess. They like those things. So can you imagine the interesting conversations we get to have all day but besides that, I mean, we got a call from, well, I'm not under an NDA for this one right now, so I can say I got a call from SETI last week, working on a prototypical situation and could use our help, and dealing with Lockheed right now. And there's even some others that we've dealt with NASA for years on and off as needed. And there's some others that were under non-disclosures, unfortunately, which really sucks, I got to tell you. Because, you know, you want to tell the world, but you can't. So I just hope you enjoy our stuff, and you know, call me. It's on the website. Email me, do whatever, you know, Facebook, and say, hey, Wayne, I've got a 9 1/4 on a CGX, and I want to use it more. Well, I'm here for you. Paul?
All right. Thank you very much, Wayne. Appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and lots of neat setups. Thanks for sharing that with us. Do we have any questions from the online community?
Yes, we do. So Wayne, Leo to CAF asks, what are the pros and cons to a steel versus a concrete pier?
Those are good questions. You know, there's basically 4 materials generally used for piers from wood. Believe it or not, some people will bolt like 4 4x4s together and put it down the ground, and there you go. That's not gonna be a long-term one, but it'll work. Aluminum, of course. If you look at PureTech's a rising column, I forget which column, lifting columns. Aluminum, concrete, of course, and steel. I'd say I'd have to say of the 4 of them, concrete's my least favorite. Number 1, you are erecting a monument to your endeavors. Should you decide to move on, somebody's gonna have to come up with a big sledgehammer and take that sucker out. If you're gonna go far above the level, the soil, you're gonna have to rebar it up and down, so it starts to get pretty complicated with building pretty massive. Generally, they're minimum 12 inches in diameter. Again, if you're going to come up some distance, you know, they get more complicated. But 12 inches is kind of obtrusive in especially in a small observatory. It's a knee cracker, that kind of thing. Another thing about concrete we found, and this is just through, you know, we deal with so many hundreds, you know, thousands of astronomers that you start to, without keeping data points, you start to, you know, get trends and stuff. And one thing that's interesting is, think about your tripod. It's made of, well, I don't know what, aluminum, pressed steel, I don't know what parts, wood, you know, they used to use. Why? Good dampener. And especially if you go back to the 90s and stuff, or even 80s, when we had the, let's say the Meads and Celestrons with plastic gears and stuff, and they were like, they were like clockwork mechanisms. You can look through the eyepiece and go click, click. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, that got worse if you put it on a concrete pier, because there was no dissipation of that vibration down through your tripod, through your, you know, through below. So it was all like neck up vibration, and it would be, you know, you go from a tripod think, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be so stable. I'm going to put a pier in, and you put a concrete pier in, and you stick your, you look at the eyepieces going, this was not a good idea. So I was never a big fan of concrete. I like steel because, yes, you put in a concrete footing, but you can bring it up to ground level or just above, and then go from there on steel. Let's say you move in 3 years, unbolt, carry away, not too difficult for, you know, put a planter pot, the next donor on it. There you go, forgotten. And of course, the best thing is, when I designed our pier, I looked around, and what I really saw the big problem was, and I came to the Toronto Centre and said, okay, is there a little Merlin guy or something, or a wizard? Because I've looked and looked and spoke to people and looked around and I can't get any answers about putting in a pier. I thought, is there some little sort of character who travels around from club to club and says, you need a hole in the ground? You know, it was really bizarre. And so I just started figuring it out, speaking to people and concrete guys and metal guys and stuff. And the biggest problem I saw was if you have a concrete pier and you've got, let's say, bolts sticking out of the top of it or something to attach your scope or your mount, when you pour that concrete, you've got to, usually you'll run sight lines and stuff to Polaris because you've only got a few degrees, whatever that latitude adjustment is in your mount or in your wedge or in your scope, that you can adjust to polar. And if you're not, well, just knock that concrete column down and build a new one, or adapt. But with steel, you see, what I did was, I came along and I said, how come everybody, when they make steel piers, they put a plate at the bottom, they put a plate at the top, and they put a pole in the middle, and then they put slots and big square plates on the bottom, and they give you, that's how they get their 5 degrees of rotation. But that's stupid, because again, you have to get your bolts within 5 degrees of, or within, let's say it's got 5 and your mount's got 5, so 10 degrees of polar alignment. Not good. So what I did was I chopped the damn top of it off, welded a collar underneath, and then I said, well, wait a minute. Let's say the CAO has, or CAR again, as I like to call it, has a bunch of piers or mounts in the observatory. If I separated the two top plates, then you could just take the top one away and put another one on and put a new mount on. You didn't have to, because again, the piers used to be designed for that mount, for that telescope. Everything was custom. Anyway, so the point is, it gave us a few things. Now we could take the cap off, and we could spin it around 360 degrees, and I put Frankenstein, I call them neck bolts, horizontal bolts around it. You torque it on, no loss of stability at all from having it not all one welded piece, as proven by the amazing thousands of photographs taken on the mounts. But not only that, you see, we get rough leveling of the pier at the bottom, and at the top, because I separated those two top plates, you level them, you put a bubble level on top and you level them down. And what happens is we make piers for owners, and then 2 years later they call me and say, when I bought the pier, I had a C-Gem, and now I'm going to G11. What can I do? Well, maybe that, in fact, what we've done with our friends at Altair Astro, who make our version of the pier for Europe, because they have a store and lots of mounts in it, and a fabrication stop down the road, they have developed, between us, we've developed adapters for an awful lot of mounts and scopes. But they figured out a way to put a whole bunch into one, so that our multi-adapter, what we call our Altair multi-adapter, that combined with the plate we're putting on supports about 20 mounts. So you have the flexibility of saying, I'd like to get an MX Plus. Bingo, take this off, bolt that on, you're off to the races, that sort of thing. So the short answer is, we can polar line anything, anytime we want. We got super amount of leveling. We can toss away an adapter plate and put on another. Vibration dissipates down the structure. Now we have much less vibration in our equipment, so it's not as big deal. You can, because the top of the cap comes off, you can dump in sand, make it rock solid. It doesn't really need it. It only lessens oscillation duration or ring time. And of course, the other thing is you can drive out here to Stratford and pick one up. So there's your answer.
Okay, very good. Thanks for all that detail. Cicely asks, why don't you use your pod in the winter? And then asked follow up, what are major winter weather considerations? Yes,
good question. We can, and we designed them. In fact, the pod I'm sitting in, the smaller pod, the 8-foot pod next to it especially, are designed, the materials will work down to -60. Of course, most of your astronomical gear, your computer, your laptop, if you're doing visual, you better heat the eyepiece. You're going to fog it up. Most of that, minus 20 starts getting to be pretty tough on a lot of those things. And out here, we can go for months. I always say the first 5 years you get an observatory, you go out every winter. And after about the sixth one, you go, if I go out as long as I can into December, and then I board it up and come out again in mid-March and retool in the winter, tweak my gear, learn some stuff, read some books, watch some videos, and come out. And by that time, you're chomping at the bit. You've got a bucket load of new gear and new ideas, and you get at it again. So, but we do design them, and there are those who go out at minus 30 and do this. And the other thing for me is we are a few dozens of yards away from our observatories, and we're 20 miles away from Lake Huron, and we can get blizzards that go basically from Christmas to March, and digging your way here is not fun. So I use this time to sort of regroup. But we do design them to be used year round, and your equipment to be left in them year round too.
Very good. A quick question for me. I've been in many of the, I'm not sure what to call it, the regular or classic pod
8,
SkyShed pod, and that's about 2 meters maybe in diameter. What's the difference with the max? How much bigger, how much taller is the max?
Good question. When we designed a pod, the 8 foot, I'd like to have designed a 9, actually, make it a little bigger, a little taller. And it was all about shipping it around the world. And we sort of broke the straw that broke the camel's back if we went to 9, and we had to go a little smaller than we wanted. But for most people, it works well. When we were moving up to the larger one, I considered 10 feet. And I thought, well, it costs hundreds of thousands. It costs $500,000 to develop one of these. And it's my wife and I. We're a mom and pa, a couple of astronomers who love doing this. More time to mortgage the house. Wayne's got an idea. And so I decided, you know what? We don't want to go a foot in radius, for $500,000. Let's go 2 feet, and a bit. So we made it 12.5. And then by the time we had the pod bays, you will see behind me here with appropriately an Apollo in there, it gets up to about 18 feet with a full complement of the bays. Thanks for asking.
Our first question. Go ahead, Paul.
Sorry to jump in. Hey, Wayne, you're still manufacturing these in Ontario and Canada. So what has stopped you from manufacturing in Asia?
Oh, no, I would never consider it. It's very important to us. Like I said, when we developed this, there really weren't any Canadian observatory companies. And a few have tried over the years, but it really takes a lot of dedication. It really does to our, to our fellow astronomers to make it work. And it was important to us that we employed our neighbors. So most of the suppliers we have, other than the box suppliers and that kind of stuff, they're basically mom and pops. They're out here in the country, and they're family suppliers, hardware suppliers, tooling suppliers, incredible people. And the only reason that we've had any success whatsoever, the two reasons, of course, are the great support from fellow astronomers and the incredible support from all these local family-owned businesses here throughout Ontario that have supported us by working with us to develop and supplying us, and not to mention these times of these terrible COVID times. I can't believe the factory in Sound that produces pods is open and running at full speed, because they are to some degree essentially make agricultural products, and especially in the spring and summer they were forced to close like everywhere else and then came back. But they've managed to get dozens and dozens of pods out for us, and we have dozens more shipping in the next couple of weeks again before Christmas, an early Christmas present for some, you might say. But that's only because of the incredibly hard work under incredibly difficult circumstances by all the great people, local people, basically, what we consider local on a world scale, that help us do all this.
Thank you.
Wayne, let me ask you one more question from our YouTube chat. And it is one that I encountered when I was helping set up the SkyShed pods at the Carr Astronomical Observatory.
Yes.
What do you recommend for the base? Patio stones or a wood deck?
I prefer, at the minimum, crushed gravel or something. I mean, you can temporarily for a year so you can stick it on your lawn. But imagine we're trying to get the top of that wall level, and you've got it on all kinds of bumps and things and stuff. So that's not great. It doesn't have to be totally level. It's very forgiving. We always build a lot of tolerance into our, and forgiveness into our designs. But I prefer a wood deck. I know people say, oh, well, critters can get through. Well, what you do is you just staple down window screening before you screw down your decking. And that allows ventilation, because we like ventilation. Imagine it's open at night, and if you're in a very dewy place, as dry as we can kind of try and keep it, moisture is going to build up. So we can't hermetically seal it, because then the problem is going to be, moss growing on your optics. So we need ventilation, and I like a deck because it ventilates. There's a gap between the dome and the wall that's overlapped, of course. And we even cover that up with foam in the winter when blizzards are coming in, high velocity blizzards. But I like that cyclic ventilation from cool air into the deck up through the observatory during the day. The problem is not the problem, but a lot of people choose to go on concrete, which generally, starts to get a lot more laborious. You have to put conduit and stuff in, and so it's more expensive and things. You don't have access to below, let's say. You have less problem with vermin eating your wires and stuff underneath. We run conduit, so they don't. But certainly a deck, and when people do build concrete, especially with like the Pod Max I'm in, we make sure we call it a pitcher's mound that they pour with a chamfer all around, because imagine places like Florida, and they're putting these things in torrential rains. Well, what happens is if you pour concrete very often, you let it cure, it'll bowl, and so therefore all the water is running towards the observatory. Not good. So we get them to do the opposite. So it kind of goes lawn, gravel, deck, and or toss up. What's your favorite for? Oh, another thing about concrete, it tends to heat up during the day and reflect light towards the observatory. So again, a deck for me, a riser as I like to call it, is the perfect thing.
Okay, good. I've built both concrete bases or patio stone paver bases and a wood deck with screening. So I've seen both in action, but thanks for all that advice.
Cool.
Thanks for your time. I think we have to move on. So
thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was great fun.
Fabulous. Thanks, Wayne. All right, let's move on to our next speaker. Frank Dempsey will give us an update on his build of a 12.5-inch telescope.
Okay, thanks, Paul, for that introduction. And as you can see in the title, it's basically an update of the project I'm working on. And so I'll just point out some details that might be relevant. And I'll start off with some very preliminary basics about what type of telescope I'm making. So just so that everybody's aware of what a Newtonian telescope is, it simply is a concave mirror which focuses incoming starlight toward the eyepiece, and it's enclosed in a tube, and it has a mount of some sort, and that's really the basic telescope that I'm making. It's a simple Newtonian. There are far more complicated telescopes that people can make and do make, but this is a simple Newtonian. So there's a few other pieces of hardware involved, and that's just basically a mirror cell which holds the mirror and allows it to be collimated, and a diagonal mirror holder, which is a 45-degree holder to direct the focused starlight out to the side toward the focuser, which holds an eyepiece. And it's really nothing more complicated than that. Those main components. So the 12.5-inch mirror is a pretty big project with a lot of work and a lot of complications. So it's really helpful to have built a telescope before that. It's a practice telescope. My practice mirror was an 8-inch mirror or 20-centimeter mirror that I made several years ago. And you see it pictured on the right, in that telescope I have on the right. And that's a long focus Newtonian, but it is it's been my favorite telescope since I built it, and it delivers really sharp, crisp images. I just love looking through it, especially because it's a mirror that I made with my hands and caused everything to work together. So that's been my favorite telescope since I built it a couple of years ago. But before I built that, my previous favorite telescope was another telescope that I built about 45 years ago. Now it's a 6-inch or 15-centimeter Newtonian you see pictured on the left. So they both deliver really sharp, crisp images. That's because they're so-called f10 or long focus Newtonians. So with that bit of experience, I decided it's time to go ahead and build a 12.5-inch telescope, which is quite a bit more work. And I'll share some details with it to try to give you some idea of what's going on. And so the bulk of the telescope making is the mirror. So the mirror takes a good 99.9% of the effort and time and work involved in making the whole telescope. And so making the mirror involves grinding the mirror starting off with rough grinding with 60 or 80 grit, which is pretty rough grit for grinding glass, down to really fine grinding, 1,000 or 1,200 grit. It's pretty fine grit. And then after that, there's a lot of hours to spend on polishing with a pitch slap. And there's also a lot of optical testing to do, followed by corrections to correct the little errors that creep in. And so the idea is to continue on with polishing until all those imperfections eventually become insignificant and I decided they are acceptable. At that point, it's finished, and it's time to send the mirror for coating. Either send it out for aluminizing or else get a spray-on kit. Anyway, it'll be ready for the telescope tube after that. And so the telescope tube or frame has the job of holding everything to allow incoming starlight to focus into the eyepiece with really good collimation. So requires a mirror cell to hold that mirror. It requires a secondary mirror and spider vane set at a 45-degree angle to direct that focusing starlight out to the side of the tube to the focuser, and of course an eyepiece. And so the tube for a 12.5-inch telescope is not so easy to find or buy or make, and I decided it was easy to make a so-called serrated truss. You see it pictured on the right, and so it's a sizable enough structure, but I decided to put together a prototype just made from 2x2 lumber. So I think of it as a lumber wagon. So that thing is hefty enough, but it's a good prototype to get everything right until I decide everything is just the right size, orientation, and then I will finish it off with spending money on aluminum tubes for it. And the other pictures just show some woodworking that's involved in putting together that wood structure. So there are some components to buy or make, and so some people make all of them. If I can buy a mirror cell and a secondary mirror and holder and the focuser, I would save a lot of time. So I actually did buy them. I found them used at swap tables at Starfest event and other places. And so I'm basically making the tube or the frame structure here and the mirror, and the other little components I was able to buy. So the mirror is the bulk of the work, and so you see it shown here on top of the pitch slap. So polishing simply involves pushing that mirror back and forth for hours and hours and hours across the pitch slap. So if that doesn't sound like much fun, you're right. It's not much fun, but it's really a tedious job, but it's pretty necessary to be very careful and precise about every step of polishing to avoid getting grit or sand or anything that could scratch it or getting other problems with it. So here's one of the problems that comes up is that the pitch slap, which is a layer of pitch with channels in it, eventually falls apart, breaks apart. So here you see it, the facets, as those squares are called, breaking off. So that's one case. You see another case here where I've polished so much that the edges are flaking off. So at that point, I have to make a new pitch slap. So the pitch slap is easy enough to make after I've done a few of them, but the first time somebody makes a pitch slap, it's pretty darn exasperating. However, it's fairly easy to remove the broken pitch slap. Comes off simply with a hammer, put it into a pot, into a melting pot, melt it into a liquid, almost like taffy, and pour it onto the new mold for the new pitch slap. And so here it is here, and eventually pull off the tape around it, and looks like quite a mess, and it is an awful mess to make, yes. But you see the 1/4 inch thick or so pitch slap there pictured there, and that's the new pitch slap. So after that, have to channel it. This is another very tedious, exasperating job. It takes hours to do. However, it's part of a task, so that's fine. More polishing. Some optical testing is required, and this is just an illustration of a so-called Ronchi test. So it's fairly easy, or at least possible, to photograph and show an image of it. It shows the bars and shape and orientation of the bars give quite a bit of information about the shape of the mirror as it's being polished. That's one test. Another test is a star test. And so here I've pulled a lumber wagon out, set it up on some sticks, and it's oriented toward Polaris. And so it's fairly easy to set it point toward Polaris, and the uncoated mirror can reflect enough light into the eyepiece to allow me to evaluate the image of the focused star. And that's the idea of a star test. So it also shows quite a lot of information at each stage of polishing as it becomes more and more perfect, or less, or the errors become smaller and smaller. And so that's a couple of tests involved. I mentioned that there were some other hardware pieces involved in making the telescope, and I mentioned that I managed to buy them. So you see the diagonal holder and spider vane on the upper left, and the mirror cell at the back of the telescope in the lower right, and lower left shows the focuser that I put onto it. And the rest is just pieces of lumber slapped together in a prototype format to make that tube. And eventually, of course, or can replace it with appropriate materials, marine plywood for the diagonal cage at the front end, and aluminum tubes for the main frame. But meanwhile, it's a prototype set up. And one other detail to point out is I need a finder scope, and this is a little 4-inch or 10 centimeter Newtonian scope that I built a few years ago. I think it'll be a great little finder scope for this 12.5-inch scope. So I built this one a few years ago. It's also nice to look through and use, and so this will be a good use for that scope. That's the finder. So I also need a mount, and I managed to find this mount a few years ago. It's one of the options I'll use for an equatorial mount. It needs a bit of mounting on top of a tripod or pedestal still, but it'll eventually serve the purpose. It's an ancient buyer's mount for anybody familiar with buyer's mount, about say maybe 20, 30 years ago. Fairly high precision piece of machining, so I think that'll handle the job pretty well. So that's my current plan. So I just wanted to continue off with a few other little details, and there are lots of styles of homemade telescopes that people make, and you see some pictured here from the Stellafane annual telescope making event convention. Some telescopes that people make look like really fine furniture, and so really good wood crafting, and so I'm definitely not doing that. Some are more functional and just have structural frames that hold everything together, and that's more like what I will be making and my telescope will look like. So there are different sorts of mounts in use too, and a lot of people are familiar with the Dobsonian mounting for telescopes of this size, and the same size telescope can also be mounted on the German equatorial, and there are other mounting styles as well. The point about the pictures at the bottom of the frame are that, in my opinion, a homemade telescope shouldn't require a crane or a forklift to move around. But look, some are pretty hefty and pretty big. And so you see the one on the lower right, that's actually a telescope that Clyde Tombaugh built. And if the name Clyde Tombaugh rings a bell, he's a man that discovered what was called Planet Pluto back about almost 90 years ago, what was called the planet Pluto. Anyway, this was his backyard telescope that he had after he retired, and this is his backyard telescope at his home in New Mexico. And so, pretty hefty telescope, but it's not really the size of structure I'm really aiming to build, but some people do build pretty big structures and frames for their telescope. So, with that bit of an overview, I mentioned that the presentation is simply an update. So I'm not done yet, and so I still have a lot of polishing to do, and so that's the current update. I have a lot of polishing to do, and then after that I'll be ready to parabolize the mirror, and that may take 5 minutes if I'm really, really good, or it may take months and months of corrections to do to correct little errors I put in while I'm trying to parabolize it. So we'll see what happens there, but that should be fun. Once that's done, it's time to get the mirror coated. The tube frame structure that I have, it'll be eventually, once I've got everything set for the correct balance point and the correct length and so on, I have to modify it a little bit, then I will make those little corrections. It'll be time to make the final version, most likely with aluminum tubes. And the mount, I have an equatorial mount. I'll start off with that mount that I showed you. Still have to mount that equatorial head, but that'll be the first estimate, and then I may be able to come up with other designs that I may have showed you in some illustrations for a more portable sort of mount. that may be a bit easier to handle. So it's an interesting project ahead, and I'm still in the polishing phase, but that's the update. So I should just mention as a final closing note that in case I've managed to fool anyone into believing I know what I'm talking about, anybody wants to get involved in doing this as well, there are quite a lot of resources around. There are some books on the market and in libraries and so on about telescope making. So a lot of these books can still be found. They're available, and some are maybe out of print now, but they're all pretty handy for giving quite a lot of information about how to build a telescope from scratch if you want to. And a few other minor resources online. Not really minor isn't the correct word. There's some significantly good resources and a lot of YouTube videos now showing how to go about the process of tricky details like grinding the mirror and polishing and pouring pitch laps. So I recommend stellafane.org. It has quite a lot of links to a lot of resources. And the cloudynights.com forums for telescope making are also pretty good. A lot of information there. One little group that's been pretty handy here in Southern Ontario for linking together telescope makers here in Southern Ontario is, or was called the Focal Point. It was a Yahoo group. So Yahoo groups won't be around for much longer, possibly another month. But you could check that out if you want to get involved right away. That it may be a immediate but not long-term resource to check out. And so those are a few resources. But in summary, I'll just point out that it's ongoing and it's an interesting and challenging hobby. So that's all I have to say for now. That's the update. Until next time. So we're finished.
That's quite an undertaking and definitely a labor of love. Lots of work. So let's go to questions. Blake, what do we have?
Okay, thanks. I have a question. My first one is, have you considered silvering the mirror as opposed to aluminum? I've heard a lot of people talking about that silvering can be done practically at home. More and more people are doing it. There's some of the ATM or amateur telescope maker groups starting to do that, and silver, as you know, has better reflectivity than aluminum. So are you set on aluminum?
No, it's a good question. It's an open question because, as you know, the silvering process is fairly new. Maybe it's been around several years. And maybe several years ago, the company, whose name I forget offhand, started selling these home silvering kits. And so far, there's been some pretty good reports. One question to consider, one reason why it's an open question for me is because how good will those coatings be in, say, 10 years or even 5 years? I know that if I spend the extra money on aluminizing and drive the mirror to Montreal, for instance, to get it aluminized, it'll probably be a very good mirror in 10 years because I have several other mirrors, like my 8-inch and 10-inch mirror, that are pretty darn good condition. They're aluminized by Norman Fulham in Montreal. And so that's a good, fairly reliable option. The new angel coating process, to me, is fairly new, but I think it's an open question. And if I hear more reports about it, that would be one reason to consider it, especially if it's low enough cost. It's also a do-it-yourself aspect to another aspect of a telescope making process, a do-it-yourself process. So it's an open question because don't know enough about it yet. Hasn't been around long enough, but it's definitely an option. And the other option that is known and reliable and maybe worth money is getting it aluminized and overcoated. So simply is an open question for now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, some people are talking about that they can do the silvering themselves at home on the order of $20 or $30. So even if it would have to be recoated, say every 2-3 years, you know, it might be a much cheaper route to go. Okay, thanks. The YouTube visitor Gay10 asked, what's the focal ratio for the mirror?
It's close to f6. So that's the short answer. So I didn't mention it. I cut all numbers and figures out of the presentation to decrease the sleepiness aspect of it for people who don't like numbers. But I left it out because it's fairly clear to see that when I had the frame tube standing up beside me, you see it's roughly my height, and so it's for a 12-inch mirror, it's just under f6, approximately f 5.8 or some little number that changes because I'm constantly polishing it. But you can say approximately f6. So the main point is that it's a reasonably manageable size. I should point out too, just in case you find it amusing, that when I started off making the mirror, I thought another f10 would be a spectacularly, phenomenally amazing planetary telescope to make a 12-inch f10 Newtonian. And then I was at a meeting or a conference or somewhere and mentioned to somebody in the early stages of grinding the mirror, and somebody mentioned, you know, Frank, you might want to be careful when you get older how high you want to be standing on a ladder in the dark when you get older. And so I came home and I thought, maybe a shorter telescope is more manageable and less risky at night. So that's why it's down to its current size. So f6 seems to be about the maximum length I can get away with. So that's why it's approximately f6.
Will that mean that you need a coma corrector?
Short answer, don't know yet. From what I can tell, probably not. Depends on, of course, on what I want to do with it. If I find the star images, if I just use it for, say, something like variable star observing, and find star images are fine the way they are, I probably wouldn't spend the extra money. But you never know if I come across a used one or decide that it's worthwhile, and it becomes a critical issue on some sort of objects where there's coma appearing in some objects that I look at, that would justify it. So right now, it's another open question. It's one of these questions that can delay until I have a telescope built.
Right. Speaking of which, a few of us want to know about the time and effort and cost. Of course, you're partway through the project right now, but do you know how many hours you've spent so far? Do you keep track of that?
I stopped keeping track because it's quite a lot of hours. I could just generally say I started a few years ago. And so I finished my 8-inch scope a few years ago. I started on the 12-inch. So it gets delayed by other priorities, like, for instance, gardening season. A big distraction this year that got in the way of a lot of polishing this past summer was a lot of good observing conditions and solar system objects that made it worthwhile to go out of my way. A comet, a bright planet nearby, a lot of great observing this past summer took priority. And so various things take priority, and so you can only say a lot of hours. And so if you want to know how that compares with, you could generally ask the question, is it saving a lot of money by making a telescope rather than buying one? Well, maybe in total dollars, buying a 12-inch scope could probably save a little bit by making one, since the cost isn't very much. They had all the materials, grinding and polishing materials and so on. Didn't really, from the leftover from the previous project, didn't really buy anything except for the mirror blank. And that might have cost me, I forget, maybe a few $100s at most a few years ago. And as the other parts that I bought for focuser wasn't a really cheapo piece of hardware, and the other pieces of hardware I bought weren't really too expensive either. So it's not really an expensive project so far. I think the only real main expense coming up will be the aluminizing, if I choose to get it aluminized. Otherwise, I could generally say a lot of hours and not too many dollars. That's probably the best, most general answer I can give to your question.
And Paul Markov asked about the spray-on kit. Is that very inexpensive compared to sending it off to Norman Fullen?
So I hadn't looked into it too closely, so I couldn't get too specific, but the Angel coating kit for coating mirrors does cost less money, yes. I have looked into it a couple times, not for a few months. I think it was last year's Stella thing where it was demonstrated. And I looked into it after that and I thought, yeah, pretty good. It could be worthwhile. So it is cheaper than aluminizing, especially when I factor in the cost of driving there twice, or even worse, shipping the mirror there, because it's pretty darn heavy.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if the cost of that home silvering kit is less than the cost of shipping the mirror to Montreal or Sudbury or anywhere. But anyways, it is definitely was lower cost, much lower cost than aluminizing when I checked into it maybe about a year ago or so. I could also mention that I have looked into the chemistry of another silvering process, an ancient silvering process, which some people do promote or do mention on their websites. I forget exactly where offhand or who exactly it was, but I have looked into it. It is quite possible to do my own silvering without buying that kit. As long as I'm careful about chemistry, fine. I've worked as a lab chemist in the past. I have no problem with it. More amateur astronomers wouldn't necessarily want to do their own home silvering, but I could do that. So I have looked into that. It would be not very expensive at all. But my question is, how long does the coating last? Especially for me, it gets wet or dew coated quite a lot when I'm out observing them. So that's one reason why I think that the aluminizing, including overcoating, would be good value for lasting for a long time. In general, the cost of the silvering kit is less than the cost of aluminizing. Yes.
Yep. Okay. That mirror blank that you got, you said it was heavy. How much does it weigh, and how thick is it? Leo 2 Calf asked that.
So it's 20 pounds or close to 10 kilograms. May or may not be heavy, but it is heavy because it's a very old mirror blank that was so-called full thickness. It was one of the castings from Corning glassware, when Corning glass used to, many decades ago, cast Pyrex blanks for amateur telescope makers when they used to cast Pyrex glass in Corning, New York. So it's one of those old mirror blanks. And there's still some around because there are some in attics or other places where people have started mirrors and not finished them, and they gradually become available as estates, houses get cleaned out, and so on, this sort of thing. They show up from time to time, but I was lucky to get it. It's far less costly, I think, than a more modern, newest generation composite or honeycomb mirror blank. I hate to even imagine the cost of them, but they would be much lighter, of course. So in general, in my opinion, it's quite heavy. It's vastly much heavier than my 8-inch mirror, which was sort of manageable. This 20-pound mirror, 20 pounds may or may not sound like a lot, but I wouldn't want to drop it on my toe or on the floor in the house or in a sink. I'd really break something. The mirror would probably survive because it's a pretty strong, hefty piece of glass. But anyway, that's his weight.
Okay, and consequently, does that drive how you're going to use the telescope? Are you planning to put this in an observatory, or is it going to be a portable telescope?
That's also an open question because I've chosen to use an equatorial mount. And so the mount that I showed a picture of briefly, the old buyer's mount that I picked up a few years ago, is not exactly what I would call portable. And the picture didn't even have the counterweights on it. So you're talking about heavy weight, you're talking about the counterweights, which are not even in that picture. And so it's not a portable mount at all. It'll be sitting in my yard. That's fine. Build an observatory around it. That's fine. You can set it in the backyard here. I also might possibly consider it using as a portable scope to take it to dark sky sites. And I may have briefly mentioned, I may not have mentioned that I showed you some other telescopes that people have made, mostly from the Stellafading website. But the included one or several of these that were in the 12-inch category that were fork type mounts that sit on the ground that people have built out of wood. And those ones I may decide to transition to that sort of mount. Or I may also have the German equatorial mount set up permanently in my backyard here with an observatory around it, and periodically take the scope out, build a portable mount for it, or a relatively portable mount that could be taken places, drop on the ground and put the scope into it. So it would sit fairly low to the ground. It would be an equatorial mount. I just happen to like equatorials. I decided to do that instead of Dobsonian, just because I like tracking mounts. So it's a little bit of an open question, but it does have it does have a German equatorial mount waiting for it, so it'll be relatively permanent in that sense. But I do guess that I will be able to eventually build a separate mount for it because I like them and because it's a creative thing to do. Look into those other mounts and see if I can build one that will be portable and that I'll still be able to handle when I'm a few years older from now. So we'll see what happens. There are other options too. One of the options, of course, is to rent some observatory space at the CAO and leave it there and go there on some dark periods and use it there. So there are other options as well, but in general, it's still an open question of how portable it will be.
Thank you. Does that Bayer's mount, though, require particular power? Am I guessing correctly that it needs 120 volts?
Yes. Short answer is yes. Longer answer is the previous owner replaced it with separate motors. The short answer is yes, because it's very similar to another older wires mount that I also have, which has 120 volt motors, and it's not a problem because I simply run an extension cord out. I can run an extension cord out, provide power to the telescopes in my backyard. The main one I need electricity for is one that I use for a project called photoelectric photometry. My other scopes to run on batteries, and so I've also found, funny as it may be, that I can get by quite well with not driving the telescope at all. So just when I've got the scope balanced well enough, it's easy, and the clutches back off enough to move really freely when I've got things just right, and so I just move it freely in my hand. So except for requiring very high magnification, like that 8-inch f10 scope I showed you, pointed at Mars, for instance, it needs to be driven to maintain the field of view at very high magnification. So if I do that with a 12-inch scope, it's not a really long focal length, but if I use it at higher magnification, it'll certainly need to be clock driven, and the motors will have to be driven. But I may get away with just using it without even bothering to drive the motors. So it's still an open question there too.
Okay, understood. I had a comment that I wanted to make when you were showing the various books that you've used and recommended. A bit of bad news surfaced a short time ago that Willem Bell, one of the big publishers of do-it-yourself and ATM books, went out of business recently. So all the books by the Willem Bell publisher, those are going to be maybe harder to come by for the time being. So that's just a little FYI to share with people.
Yeah, I agree. It's a point. If somebody wants to buy a new book, it's a bit of a hassle now, of course. But the main point about ATM hardware and gear is that there's a fairly good population of ATMers in North America, and so parts become available from time to time, including books. So it wouldn't be too hard to pick up a secondhand book because somebody has, say, built a scope, say, 20 years ago, eventually decides to declutter, and you see stuff that's been sitting around in somebody's house or shelf for years finally be put on sale, including some old parts that I showed you, say, for instance, a spider mount for the diagonal or a main mirror. So there's still some used ones available that come on sale from time to time that have been sitting around, similar with those old books. They're classic old books, and furthermore, some libraries have them. I wouldn't say how soon libraries will be open, not in the near future, maybe, but some of those books can probably be easily picked up secondhand. Several, like Richard Berry's book, How to Build a Telescope, and some of the other ones, Darwin and Bell books, are probably popular enough that they are on the secondhand market. I'm just guessing, because I see a lot of parts and hardware on the secondhand market for ATMers. It probably wouldn't be too hard to pick up some of those books. So it's not totally suicidal type news that Willem Bell has gone out of business.
Cicely asked, now you've been doing this for a while, but she asked, through the process of designing and building telescopes and considering their history, have you had any moments or experiences that gave you a new appreciation of the craft?
Short answer is yes. Let me try to think of some examples I can quote in a hurry. I have to say that the best example would be my with my 8-inch f10. Looking at really crisp, in nights of ultra steady, seeing really crisp, sharp images of big objects like Saturn and its satellites and rings, or Mars right now this past couple of months, or the Moon. Really give me an appreciation for the ability to finish off a good mirror and mount everything in good collimation and good support, and make a good telescope out of it. Let me just give you one sub-example of that one that might help to illustrate the situation. And this was a few years ago when I was star testing that 8-inch mirror. It was uncoated. I had it out one morning, pointed at the Moon to check out the image of it. And I was almost surprised to see the focuser, which I had a plastic, a metal and plastic focuser on it. It's actually the focuser that you may have seen on that little 4-inch reflector that I might have illustrated. I thought I'll just put that onto the telescope as a temporary thing, and at least for star testing. And I was a little bit surprised to see at a magnification of around 540, I could see the bending of that, the parts, and I could tell the turbulence in the image was from a little bit of thermal turbulence. I could see a little bit of turbulence from the turbulence in the air, the different layers of the air, and I could see a little bit due to the bending of the focuser as I tweaked the focus to get really sharp focus on a part of the Moon that was, a crisp silhouette along the terminator maybe. I was a little bit surprised to see the bending of the focuser because it was plastic parts and so on. And so then after that, I really, really appreciated the ability to make, use, and mount really good, high quality parts, all in a high quality configuration that maintains good collimation, good alignment. And that was how I chose to go with the Moonlight focuser, which you may not have recognized. The metal focuser I bought is not a cheap one. It's a very good one. It's a very well machined metal focuser. But partly because of that, I recognize the benefit of really well made and aligned and co-aligned parts all working together can give a really amazing good image. So that's just one example.
Thank you very much, Frank. That covers off our questions from the chat and the ones that I had. Very, very inspiring. All the hard work that you're doing on your own building gear.
Okay, well, I'm glad to share it with you. And so it's been a fun project. It's an ongoing fun project. So maybe I'll give you some updates sometime in the future.
All right, thanks again, Frank, and definitely come on back to and give us an update when the project is finished. So that wraps up the speakers for this evening, and please give us about a minute or so while we set up for the announcements. We'll be right back. Hello. Hello, we're back with Ralph Chou and the announcements. Go ahead, Ralph.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Well, let me start by once again thanking our three presenters, Denis, Wayne, and Frank, for their presentations this evening. I hope that all of you online enjoyed them very much. A couple of weeks ago, I was able to enjoy one of the perks of being the president, and that was to announce the recipients of this year's Center Awards. And, you know, that's really one of the pleasant things that a president of the center gets to do. Tonight, unfortunately, I have the other side of the coin to present to you. Yesterday, I learned that one of our members passed away suddenly, and we didn't actually hear about his passing until a few months after the death actually occurred. We lost Anthony Adamson, a member who had joined us in 2017, and he and his wife were frequent visitors to the CAO, the Car Observatory, because they lived up in Collingwood, and he was a very enthusiastic member during the time he was with us. His wife informed me yesterday of his passing, and she's going to be making a memorial donation in his honor to the Toronto Centre. So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to express publicly our very sincere condolences to the Adamson family for their loss. Okay, could we go to the slides and let's just take a look at what is coming up over the next few weeks. I have this slide presentation all ready for last night, and then unfortunately YouTube managed to do its global fit. So here we are tonight. Okay, 2 weeks from last night will be our next meeting, which is a speakers night online on the 25th of November. Our speaker is Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is with the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo. And he's going to be talking about how to make gold astrophysically speaking. Once we are done with Dr. Siegel's presentation, we will have a brief adjournment, and then those of you who have registered before November 23rd will be able to join the Zoom session when we convene our annual meeting of the Toronto Centre on that evening. And hopefully that will begin around 9 o'clock, and we're hoping that we will be done by 10 o'clock, maybe sooner. So that is in approximately 2 weeks' time. After that, we have our last recreational astronomy night online of the year on Wednesday, December the 9th. The speakers, we have a full agenda for that evening. The speakers are Ron McNaughton presenting The Sky This Month, Dave Lane from the Halifax Centre talking about the Mini Robotic Observatory, and then Jerry Villa will be coming back to talk about the life and discoveries of Galileo Galilei. So in addition to these particular talks, we also have a special online presentation that Blake Nancaro is going to be doing to present Stellarium to those of you who may know about that particular app, but don't particularly know how to take advantage of its features. And Blake has kindly offered to present a talk on how to use Stellarium, some of its features, and that's to introduce a course that he'll be offering to members on really maximizing the use of Stellarium, and that'll be a registered program that will be announced online. I think that Blake is typing the information about the Stellarium session into the chat, so take a look there for that information. Okay, as you know, we are shifting our EPO, Education and Public Outreach activities, to virtual star parties and virtual presentations. The EPO committee is starting to receive requests for online presentations. Last night, they in fact were doing a Guide and Pathfinder activity simultaneously with our attempts to put this particular program onto the live stream on YouTube. And we are seeing more of these programs being requested of us. So EPO committee is going to be in need of volunteers who can help with presenting these programs, and also perhaps providing access to images and directly off the telescope live, as well as pre-recorded images and so on. So if you are able to help us with that, it would certainly be appreciated. Observing programs also are in suspension for the moment, but again, we are looking at whether we can safely resume these activities once all of the pandemic alerts and restrictions are eased off. For the moment, since much of our membership lives in code red areas right now, we're not going to be doing anything formal, but I understand that there are members who have been taking advantage of going out to places like Glen Major Forest and our other observing sites to meet up and do some observing at appropriately physically distant positioning. So again, this is something that I hope some of you are able to enjoy, but nothing formal will be going on until after we see things ease off. Just a reminder about the various programs National Society is offering. They have their speaker series with this URL, and there are a variety of other things that they are offering, and I encourage you to check out rasc.ca for those program offerings, register for them and take advantage of. They're no charge, and there is some really interesting stuff that they're presenting on how to use the Observer Handbook, observing tips, etc., etc. The Carr Observatory I mentioned is closed because of the pandemic, and we will not be resuming any kind of activities there until further notice. And again, this is a necessary step because of the situation with the pandemic. Also, we are seeing that the weather is starting to affect the roads access up there, and we have no parking arrangements right now for the winter months. We did have some arrangements that have basically fallen through for this year. So until we can establish something with the town of Blue Mountains for parking arrangements on the approaches to the property, we cannot open the site up for access in any case. So we'll let you know if anything develops, but for the moment, don't plan on using the site until the warm weather returns next spring. Just a reminder that we are dependent on your membership fees to help finance our various activities, and we would encourage you to renew promptly when you receive your renewal notice. This does help us a lot, and it also ensures that you're going to continue to be able to access the various services that we provide. Remember also that there is some assistance for members in need who may be in financial difficulties through the RASC Emergency Fund, and you can get information about that in a private and secure way by inquiring at the national office. Again, we have a lot of volunteer positions that can be filled. As I was mentioning before, we need some more volunteers for EPO activities. But another one position that we really do need to work on is an editor for our newsletter scope. You may have noticed that we've had no scopes issued in the last year, and part of that is because our current editor just is not able to produce it at this time. So we do need to have this position filled soon so that we can resume publication of scope and make sure that we have something other than just the announcements on this meeting to inform you about what's going on. So if you can help out in any way with this, please let our volunteer coordinator know through volunteer@rastio.ca. Okay, I think that's everything. Blake is putting the information on the Stellarium webinar online in the chat. And other than that, let me wish you a healthy and safe evening, and we will see you in a couple of weeks' time for the next speakers night and the annual meeting. Good night, everybody. Stay safe.